I'll go ahead and call this meeting of the Fergus Falls Port Authority to order. Today is November 15th, 2021. And Caroline, sorry, not Caroline, Clara, there we go, wrong K. Let's see, so, we don't need you quite yet, Clara. The first item on the agenda is the approval of the open meeting minutes from October 18th, 2021, and the closed meeting minutes from November 4th, 2021.
And you do have the closed minutes in a hard copy on your desks. If you would just take a minute maybe to flip through those, and then when you are done with them at the end of this meeting, if you could just hand them back in so they're not floating around.
Okay. So let's see here. Okay. So do we have a motion to approve these minutes, or would you like more time to review? You take a couple minutes. Anyone want to make a motion to?
I'll make a motion.
Steve will make a motion to approve. Do we have a second?
I'll second it.
Anthony? All right. All in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. All right, that passes. Next is the joint session follow-up featuring Clara.
Okay, hello. So I think exactly like a month ago maybe, we had a joint session between the Port Authority and Council to talk about developing an economic development policy. So Tom wanted to just do a little bit of a follow-up for that, so here we are. When I think the minutes for that joint session were done by Lynn, and they are out with the packet for council on the 18th. So if you want to look back at the minutes, that's where you can find them. If you want them sent directly to you, just let Jill or me know and we can do that. But otherwise, as an overview, what we did was we put a policy in context. Karin gave us a little bit of an introduction to a comprehensive plan and how an economic development policy would fit within that. We talked about the business subsidy policy that the city currently operates under, and discussed what other things had been done in the past regarding an economic development policy and how it had mostly centered around capital improvement planning, that process, and working with WCI on their SEDS. Then we got into a discussion of growth. We wanted to define what growth was because the surveys that went out to all members of the Port Authority Council, Greater Fergus Falls Board of Directors, the Business Development for Fergus Falls Group, and city department heads came back as pretty well saying that what we're all looking for is growth, and which left us with the question, well, how do we define growth? So what we ended up doing during that meeting was defining growth. We left it at increase in taxes collected. There were 55 votes for that. An increase in the number of businesses in town, and an increase in the number of employees. So obviously there's a lot more nuance that goes into it, but those were kind of the three buckets that we ended with as things that we all agreed on as growth. And then we ended with some next steps. Jill, can you just hit the button to go to the next slide for me? Yeah, okay. So we are at the very beginning of this process. So in developing a policy and fitting it in with a comprehensive plan, what we are looking at is probably like at least a 1-year process, possibly up to 2 years. Comprehensive plans don't happen quickly. Policies also need to fit in with that process. I'm not saying the policy itself is going to take that long, but we're looking at this from more of like a 30,000 foot height. So we have things that need to fall into place before we finish developing the policy. So we are still here in, I would actually argue that we're probably still a little bit before outreach. We are still in the process of defining what the goals and priorities of the city are. And I think our work session was really good. I think conversation was great. I actually think we might have started too big. So I almost wish that we could go back and do it again and have it just be a discussion with council. Because I really do think that council needs to be the ones that are setting the priorities and putting forward a vision. And I think that's the point where we still are, is we still need to get to that unified vision with our elected officials that can then be turned further outward to our partners. So that's why I have an arrow pointing into outreach to goals and priorities. I think we're actually there, and that outreach is we're actually like a step above that. I also think we need to look a little bit more at the study section. And I think there's some more internal work that needs to be done by staff with council members to make sure that we're all on the same page about, like, what is a policy versus a plan? I think there were some questions about that remained from the joint session. I think some people were talking about policy, some people maybe were talking about plans, and we really need to be focusing on an internal policy right now. So that's kind of where we are at this point. I think there's still quite a bit of legwork that needs to be done. I think we made a really good start. But I don't feel comfortable saying, like, yep, we can churn out a policy here in the next, 3 months. So that is my follow-up to you. I am sure there will be comments and or questions.
Thank you, Clara. Yeah, I think determining goals and priorities of the city, what do you guys have? I'm thinking of it from the Port Authority's perspective, our role. And I know that we've had a lot of conversation about this in the past, but I don't know if we've ever really, landed on anything. I think what we need to do is really define our mission as a Port Authority and what exactly are we trying to do? Does anybody have any comments on where we're at with that, or ideas or anything that you would like to see us pursue?
Well, don't we, and I don't know, oversimplify it, but and I realize there's probably some overarching work here, like you say, to do from a city's perspective, but from the port's perspective, like you say, we're really responsible for the infrastructure and amenities of the city. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
From an economic development perspective, the city wants to recruit new businesses and then help the ones that are here expand, which is those two things from an economic development perspective, two other things from community development. So where do we fit in those?
And I'm going to walk it back even just a step further, and I'm going to say that the Port Authority is not, it's not your role to be in charge of the infrastructure, but the Port Authority can be a tool that the city can use to put infrastructure in place.
Totally agree.
Okay.
Totally agree.
And you used the word tool, and I was thinking that, and maybe asking you the question as a Port Authority, are you comfortable with that role being a tool that's used when those opportunities present themselves, like the Lakes Country Service School? We certainly did the bonding for the downtown project through the port. When projects were here, because certainly our economic development arm is Greater Fergus Falls, so, I mean, it's just a question. Are you comfortable being a tool that, you know, is used to bring those together?
I think that's exactly what we're supposed to be doing on behalf of the city, right?
Yeah.
And I think you're doing that.
I mean, that's my feeling, is like, we can't have too many, cooks in the kitchen. If we have Greater Fergus Falls pushing economic development, and then, we don't need other groups that are doing that and distracting or giving mixed messages, because that was the issue before. There was multiple places to go to get information, even within City Hall, and that led to confusion and generally led to people getting dismayed and then saying it's too difficult to work with the city of Fergus Falls, because I get different answers from different people. So I mean, I think we are a tool, as opposed to being a developer as such, and going out there and soliciting people to come and live in Fergus Falls, or, to bring their businesses. But if Greater Fergus Falls brings somebody to the city that needs help, then bring it to the port, and if that's where the port can help, vector windows, a classic. And even, the water jet person that actually came into town and took on board an empty building. Those are the things I see that we do.
Yeah, and that's a really good point. And then I guess the question is, what does that look like? Are we comfortable just, waiting for the opportunities to come around, or should we be? Are there areas where we could be being more proactive?
I think we need to make sure that within the areas of economic development, that we have the tools to step up. So recruiting businesses is infrastructure where it should be, are the amenities where it should be. I mean, it just comes down to that. And if we're short, that's where we put our time and our resources to be prepared. So whoever's recruiting, we've got those two things nailed.
So we want to keep the tool sharp, make sure we've got what we need to, to work with situations that come up.
I vaguely remember when we were trying to figure out what the role and direction of the Port Authority was that we had talked about being more of a reactive port with things coming to us and making decisions on that, and letting the economic development entities in town bring that kind of stuff to us.
Yeah. But anybody disagree with that at all? What do you think, Brent?
The whole bit before, I mean, even before I got on the port, it was always made to me to believe that the port was basically, like everybody says, a tool. We're here to assist in those areas. Now, when it comes to, I had a major problem with this economic development thing. I mean, we had like 7 different categories in there. And one of the people who had actually contacted me said basically, why are we picking one? Because they all have an equal impact on economic development. Instead of, why are we picking just 1, 2, or 3 of them? It's just, and they agreed, and the fact is that actually the part of the taxes actually is a meter on how your success went. Because if everything works out just the way you're hoping it does, that's going to raise the property taxes, and that's going to show you that you actually had progress on what you were doing. So, I mean, picking one of them or 2 of them or 3 of them, it just was a hard time for me to swallow, because this person who contacted me, I agreed the same way. Each one of these plays an equal role, and I'm just wondering why we're picking a few.
And I will just maybe clarify that you weren't picking, but you were prioritizing. So all of those, I think we all acknowledge that those were all very important buckets, and we were not discounting any of them. But what your role was on that day was to give a direction as to what your priorities out of those multiple buckets were. And we listed 3 priorities, but we probably could have gone through and prioritized all of them. We just wanted to end with a nice number that we could move forward with.
I think a good example would be, to your point, is, if we had so we're ready with our tools, right? However good or bad they are. Our role is infrastructure and amenities, And it doesn't matter who brings it to us. It could be Greater Fergus Falls, it could be the chamber, it could be an individual developer, we don't care. But they have a deal. And we look at it, and I think then we look at it through the lens of economic development, even though we're not the developer getting it. And then so to Brent's point, what does this deal do for the city? Right, and it isn't rocket science. We can look at, does it create new net jobs? Or is it retail? Or is it distribution? And we can just assess it. And if something doesn't bring enough value, we don't have to do it. If it brings a lot of value, we should do it. And we should look at what's the new net jobs. A new manufacturer with no competition, clearly, my gosh, we're gonna take more risk for that. Something that's just another retail establishment, maybe even competing with something else, well, maybe a little less, or maybe not, I don't know. I don't know if we have to get all balled up around that. I think we just make sure we're good at the infrastructure, make sure we're good at the amenities, and then have a understanding of economic development. So when these things come in, we can
Sure.
make a decision.
And, when I was sitting here thinking about, quote unquote, sharpening the saw, and, things like, really making sure that we have the policies and procedures in place so that when those deals are presented to us, we have a process that we follow every time. And, versus doing a one-off on whatever comes up, we have a process that we can, if we decide to deviate from that process a little bit, we can, but at least we have a process in place that everybody follows.
The first question would be, what do we have in place now?
Yeah.
I don't have a clue.
Yep.
I mean, maybe that works and we're done. If it
Yeah.
doesn't, how do we tweak it?
Yep, I agree. So we maybe don't need to focus on this as much, now that we, kind of have a better idea of what our role is, then we can focus on things that'll make us more effective.
Yeah, you can still do that, but I mean, we would fit as a piece in this bigger thing. That
Yep.
percent, yeah.
So I think what I'm hearing is the city council should take the lead on this. You guys are gonna kind of stay in your lane, so to
Yep.
speak, and you're identifying your lane as being a piece of that puzzle, but not maybe central to this.
Yeah,
And I think I would agree with that. And I think staff kind of, in the conversations we had internally after that session, I think that's kind of where we all went. It was like, okay, that was good dialogue, but it wasn't probably the most productive in terms of getting to what we need out of policy to make financial or incentive decisions on a city council level.
yep. And real quick, I did see Bill flinch a little bit when Brent mentioned increasing property tax or something like that. We're talking about tax collection, not the tax
the
rate,
base,
the value,
yes.
yep, tax base. So not
And that easy to read, huh?
Always.
I saw it. It's pretty funny. So just to clarify that nobody is talking about raising any taxes per se.
So-
Claire.
No, I was just gonna, Bridget, go ahead.
Well, I would just only add that as a port member, that's not on the city council, I think just the one area that could maybe be more helpful as a port member is when projects are presented, that there is sort of that 3 or 4 questions that have been, okay, well, what is the risk to the city? What, how does this meet the priorities that we've established? How will this benefit our city so that, we're having a better informed decision about if we are doing TIF or we're incentivizing or a little more base
Yeah.
for, why we're gonna do what we are, because, Lakes Country Service was a low risk, very high reward thing that was kind of a no-brainer, but they all won't be that cut and dry, going forward.
Yep. Good
I'd like
point.
to,
Yeah.
100% agree with you, and thinking down that realm too is because staff needs that direction. When we hear from people that are looking at a project, want some assistance, it's good if we know, and the whole reason behind a policy is so we can say, we don't want everyone that's coming in to bring them all the way through the process and think they're promised something that really we get to this level, and then you say, really, this doesn't make sense, because just as an example, like, say, would we give TIF for someone to bring a bookstore right next to Victor Lundine's? Retail. We typically haven't done it for retail. We probably wouldn't. But we wouldn't want to bring someone through the process and say, well, we'll see what they say, and get their hopes up and thinking that that's what we want this policy, so we have some guidance, so we don't bring everything before the port or the city council so that we know where those, here's that checklist, here's the things, and that's how this all started, is so we have some good direction that we can't promise, because we can't support everything out there. We're gonna have to make choices.
And by the time we get to the point of presenting, the developer has invested so much money into it for us to create a TIF plan or an abatement
Yeah.
plan
Because
that,
TIF fees are $15,000, they have to pay up front
You
if they
know,
want it.
we should be getting ahead of that and
Yeah.
saying, no, that doesn't fit within priorities of the city council, or that's a great fit. Take the next step and make that investment.
No question,
Exactly.
I'm right with you.
Yep.
I think the big unknown is we have the policies, but what things should the port be doing proactively before a deal comes? That's a harder deal, right? Because there's not a deal there, but where do we put our resources to be ready so we can actually get that deal?
And I think some of that will become more clear throughout the comprehensive planning process, because we will be discussing, one thing that we talked about when I first started with the port was we need a land use plan. We still have not moved in that direction, and that's simply because I have now realized the port's not the one who's going to make that land use plan. That's a different mechanism. So I think we're going to be finding that from our comprehensive planning process, some of these bits and pieces are going to be falling into place, and the port's going to realize where it needs to be going, and in that regard can become more proactive because we do have a plan for the future.
And the other thing I would argue to that end is, Greater Fergus Falls plays a key role in this, and that's identifying what's lacking from an infrastructure or a barrier or, what have you, point of view that the Port Authority can help to remove or address or work on. And we heard some of that feedback a few years ago in terms of like shovel-ready sites, and whether or not the Port Authority thinks that's the way to go. That we can have that debate, but those are things I think people out in the field that are working with developers or that are working on opportunities and see things that stall out and can identify why. That's where we, I think, need to rely on that communication from our economic development partners, so we can get ahead of those things. Because they're in the driver's seat on being able to see, big picture, why things do or don't move forward.
And I think, to offer an answer to your question, Steve, of, what should we be doing to be more proactive? I think, if we take the first step of coming up with these, kind of criteria and policies, I think that would be a good place to start. And then, does anybody have any, is that the right way of thinking? Is that kind of what, that seems like a way that we're preparing to, more efficiently meet the need. Anybody have any thoughts on that?
I think some sort of, as you say, almost like checklist for somebody coming in. It's like if you meet this criteria, you can move forward. If you don't meet this criteria, then you need to kind of like step back and fix it, and then move forward. And I think we can look at infrastructure, but we also have to kind of appreciate that we really don't have a budget. We have $50,000 a year, and 9 times out of 10 we buy something that is distressed. We do it up, make it saleable, and then we sell it for a loss. So, which again is part of our function. That's the way it goes. So unless we're also going to raise money as such, we're not in a St. Paul where you can buy a piece of land for $1 million, clean it up, and then sell it for $20 million. We're in Fergus Falls, and if we buy it for $1 million, we clean it up, we're probably going to lose money on it. But it's for a greater good that we're doing that. If you look at like the Norgren property, we've owned that forever, and we'll never get the money back out of it. So I think we also have to kind of understand that's also part of our role, is that if we didn't do it, vis-a-vis like the dairy property that we're going to talk about, it would still be the dairy property.
Yep.
But likewise, we're not going to get the dairy property to be anything unless we do Stanton up. And Stanton Avenue is going to be a major infrastructure project for the city. So, I think that's kind of where we also have to kind of look, is we are part of this, but we're a small cog in a bigger picture.
And I don't think we have to go crazy with proactive things, the shovel-ready site thing's a great example. We may not, we can't afford it, whatever. And I think until we know what kind of deals we may or may not have because of it, that'll gauge how aggressive we get. So we don't do any of it maybe, but maybe we do a brochure or something marketing-wise to emphasize what we have and then see what happens. Years ago, we did it without the certification process. So there's no doubt we're better off if we have it, but if it's too expensive, we, close the gap, like you say, and just see what happens. So we don't have to do it, but I agree. I think the first thing is the policy. What do we have in place now?
Yeah.
First, how far off is it, if it's off at all? And if we add or have to do another one, then we do another one.
Yep. Yeah, I agree. Clara, do you, can you start working on that, maybe put together a presentation on what we have?
Like the business subsidy policy?
I think, because we said earlier, it's probably better led by the city rather than the Port Authority. We don't want the tail wagging the dog.
Sure, that
So-
makes sense.
Which, in essence, I mean, this
Yeah,
has
I
all to
know.
be on its own. When we say this, I don't want to be offensive to the two of you.
Sure. Second-class citizens, right?
Yeah.
I'm gonna text Rebecca and tell her what you said. Hold on a second.
Yeah.
I think, whatever we do, we're not gonna get out ahead of the council because we're recommending it to them anyway. So I think we should do as much as we can, as fast as we can, and then give it to the council. The council still has to say yay or nay. I mean, there's no tail wagging the dog, I don't think. I hear what you're saying. But I think part of our job is to say, here's what we think it is. Now,
I think you guys
agree or not?
have been really good at being at least very quickly reactive when things are coming to you. I mean, you've sold all of the Progress Drive stuff. That took a long time to get to that point, and that is done now. I mean, anything that does come before you, you have expedient conversations. I think you are doing your roles well.
And the dairy property, I mean, certainly the port is a big part of making that all happen.
Yeah, and I don't mean to minimize, any of that. I think I'm just thinking that when we're presented with these, opportunities, we just want to make sure that we're as prepared as possible to handle it quickly,
Well,
and
And maybe that's to Bridget's point, maybe the next step is the 3 or 4 questions, the planning commission always has for a variance, does it meet X, Y, and Z criteria? Here's how it does or doesn't, and this is why we're recommending it or not. Maybe those 3 or 4 questions is what we can come up with soon, so that we can make those informed decisions.
Yeah, I'd like to know if the council is not on the same page as we are. Because I think we get it. I'd like to.
yeah.
I think council will too, but if they're in a different position, I'd like to know that. Or something we missed.
Yeah.
Just looking at
Look and see who's back there.
Yeah, well, so what do we need to take any particular action right now? Do we, where do we want to go from here? I'm trying to wrap my head around the whole thing.
Well, what I hear Andrew saying is that it's a direction from the city council that will set up the guidance for the port in terms of those questions. So I don't even know if it's our authority or it's our position to develop those. Not that I don't foresee them being way off from something that, Steve or
Well, you listed a couple of questions,
Yeah,
what were they again?
the risk versus
Yeah, I think that's,
the risk, yeah.
Maybe putting, if I may.
Yeah, please.
Put Amy on the spot for a second. The county has a pretty good, not pretty good, I'm not saying it could be better, I don't know it well enough, but a policy related to economic development, or I think you call it the tax abatement policy.
Yeah, we don't really have TIP.
There-
It's our only school. So.
Right. There are maybe 4 or 5 boxes that need to be checked or that are prioritized or whatever. And I think those are maybe tie into the 4 questions that need to be resolved or addressed that Bridget's referencing.
Yeah, they cover.
I'm all in favor of not reinventing the wheel.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's a little bit different.
And we do have-
Need it,
Yeah.
out. It's just a general guide to help guide the decision.
Yep.
What ballpark you're in.
Right. So
Yep.
these, I mean, having, questions that you're checking off on a box, that's all well and good. I think we do still have to remember that there is a larger conversation that needs to still happen with the council, which is like, what is your vision and what are your goals? So,
And I think to your point, and then Amy can jump in here, the council needs to have that discussion. There's only 3 of you on the port that aren't on the council. I don't think anyone here would want to exclude your voices or opinions. So please feel free to give the feedback or to participate however you see fit, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to have a session with the council and then a session with the port. I think the council just needs to run with that. And, how you guys want to be involved in that, I guess we'll leave it up to you, but that would be my suggestion is, joint meetings are fine, but they get complicated too because you guys don't know which hat to wear necessarily, because you are expected to wear different hats throughout the evening, so.
Oh, I'm fine with that. I don't speak for it, but I'm fine with that. I hear 1 year and I'm thinking this is 2 meetings and done. So that's all I would ask is that they cut to the chase. Here's what the port should be doing. I think we've already laid out the structure. The question is what are the policies that follow. So if they do the same thing and come to the same conclusion, great. If they come to a different conclusion, we should just know that so we know where we stand. But others have no problem with, we don't need to be involved in that. Just see what comes back, I guess.
All right.
I can just quickly overview the private development objectives is what it's called. And it's to retain or increase jobs. There's a little more verbiage to it, but so you guys have talked about jobs. Encourage additional unsubsidized private development, either directly or indirectly to spin off development. So kind of getting something started so that more can happen. Facilitate development and achieve the development of sites that would not otherwise be developed, kind of generic, but remove blight and encourage redevelopment of commercial industrial areas. Offset the increased costs of redevelopment over and above those normally incurred in development. Provide infrastructure necessary to accommodate economic development, and then to meet other public policy goals. And I think that kind of references to what Clara just mentioned. What are those bigger policy goals? And in Otter Tail County, the 3 listed in no particular order, all are important. Development of quality childcare, preservation and creation of resorts, and development and preservation of housing. So those are the 3 areas that we also, look at in prioritization. So those are laid out, and then there's some additional objectives, but that are looked at as well.
Yeah, I'm fine with borrowing those if we can, Amy.
Yeah, and I'm sure there's lots of other examples that might be more city applicable. Where we're a little different tool.
So the port has multiple tools, right? Some that are much more high risk or maybe contentious than others, like levying taxes, like bonding, like TIF, right? So I don't know how that has to get parsed out, but I would certainly look at that differently if we were going to be levying taxes on the city versus running a bond through the port, right? Or
And depends what the funding source is for the bond, because like the bond for Lakes Country Service Co-op, fully funded by the rent payments, like you said, complete no-brainer. That was such a good deal. It wasn't controversial because we weren't raising taxes for that, versus if we do a project and raise taxes for it, well, then we have to discuss that, and that's where you weigh out those, the benefits.
right.
So if we could get examples of those questions to ask, then maybe you could send them out to all of us before the next meeting, and we can, find, just kind of tweak those and see what we want to do with them. And Andrew, that would be something that, that'd be something that we would do to benefit us, right, as a port?
Yeah, I mean, I think the city council, needs to, again, take the lead on that, because those are questions that we should be asking as a city and then directing to the Port Authority if there's a role they play.
Okay.
Because I think there's other areas that play a role, not just the Port Authority.
Yes.
Sure.
Yeah.
Okay.
And frankly, there will be development projects that the Port Authority doesn't have a role in because they're fully funded, they're strictly TIF or whatever that looks like, and
Like the TIF on the mill.
Yep. Just
You know,
Yeah.
it's a prime example of what TIF should be used for, that blighted property like Amy was mentioning in their policy. No one can argue that that's not a blighted property, and
And by virtue of the power and tools that you guys have, you're probably gonna get the wonky ones, you're probably gonna get the risky ones, you're probably gonna get the ones that haven't fit into any of the other boxes, quite honestly. And so, I mean, I think that's an important role that you play, and I think you play it well. And I think, you know, I say that because we don't want to get ourselves too boxed in, because you kind of are the last resort and the flexible resort. But I do think we need guiding principles as well, because there are some tough decisions that this group has to make.
And I don't want us to get bogged down in like listing next steps or having something laid out just for the mere fact that we have something laid out. Like, I want us to do this work properly, and sometimes that takes a little bit of time. So I'm sorry if I always come across as like pedantic or, you know, bogged down in semantics, but like I really do think that we need to have our ducks in a row before we say, okay, here are your policies and procedures. Like, I would like the time to be able to develop those properly.
And I think that's especially true on this policy for the city council, because every single one that comes along that doesn't fit our criteria is gonna argue why they should fit the criteria or that we should change the criteria. And the city council needs to truly buy into it and decide that, you know, yes, this is the position we're going to take, or it puts staff in an awkward and difficult situation every time they come in and we say no, and then they end around and, you know, we flex the rules for this particular one, and then you might as well not have a policy. So
Sure.
I don't want to, I don't mean anything more than what I just said, but I think that's why you need to lay it out properly and get the buy-in. And I want to make sure the city council, for sure, is bought into whatever those priorities are.
Sure. Yep.
Clara wants to make sure you guys are, because she's got to worry about you.
Well, we can, unless anybody else has anything on this particular topic, we can move on just to keep the meeting going along. But I appreciate everyone's feedback and questions and comments. It helps me to wrap my head around the whole thing. So look forward to more discussion on that in the future. Okay. Clara, discussion on joining Greater Minnesota Partnership.
So Amy graciously offered to come as a board member. I'm just gonna let you get up there, but just, I heard feedback throughout my time as executive director that I think you want me to be like talking to more people and involved with more organizations, and this is a way to do that, and Amy can give us a little more info.
Hi, good evening, President, Commissioners, I guess Commissioners, yes, okay, I forget which, it's got different directors, titles, you know. All right, well, thanks, Clara, for extending an invite, and I'm glad this is on your radar. It's an organization that I've been part of, the Greater Minnesota Partnership. It is a member-based organization that really provides a voice for Greater Minnesota at the legislature, specifically around topics that are unique and distinct to Greater Minnesota. So providing our voice and our stories and our scenarios of why housing is challenging, why childcare is a challenge, different than how it is in the Twin Cities. They are challenges there too, but we're operating in a different environment. And the function of this group is to bring those priorities to the legislature, advocate on behalf of solutions that will make a difference in these areas. The top three, we're just finishing, so I've been on the board, I think maybe this is my 5th year possibly, and I am now president of the board as of September. So I'm really glad to be here and have this chance locally to talk about it. Like I mentioned, it is membership based. It is private sector. Otter Tail Power is a member. Locally, Lake Region Healthcare actually is a member too, just a new member that just joined. Vector Windows, their ownership group, is a member. So those are some of our private members that are locally driven. Other EDAs are member economic development groups. Perham, Pelican Rapids are both members from our area. West Central Initiative, Anna is actually on the board as well. With me and others from across the state. And so it is really a great cross-section of private representation who are looking at the top 3 priorities, which are broadband, childcare, and workforce housing that we are really honed in on. And again, there isn't anyone else providing that voice of Greater Minnesota at the legislature. It originally, kind of going back to the history of Greater Minnesota Partnership, it came out of the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities. And so it was an offshoot of that, still is provided some support from that organization, but has diversified pretty dramatically its membership and grown its membership to become nearly standalone. And that's a goal within my tenure as board chair that we're hoping to move into a financially standalone position through its membership growth. So we're in a growth position. We've planned to add 20% to our group, and I did not talk to Clara about this. I'll be honest, she identified it. I think I've mentioned the group, and it's been out there, but we're finishing, like I said, our legislative priorities. We actually have a meeting on Wednesday. We'll be talking about that and getting those forward. And there is discussion as another priority. We have our top 3 tiers, but then also do look at some other priorities that are issues. And healthcare and emergency medical services has risen to a level of discussion about what that might look like. We don't know what the policy position is yet, but as a critical need, it's certainly something we hear at the county from many of our providers, both long-term care, primary health, and our emergency providers, that we're in a challenge on a number of levels. So that is being looked at as an additional tier of prioritization and having, again, that collective Greater Minnesota voice. We do have large industry. I mentioned some of the locals, but also, again, the representation is statewide. Mayo Clinic is a member. Other utility providers, that is pretty across the state. So we have Minnesota Power, Great River Energy, in addition to Ottawa Power that I mentioned, and a lot of others. So that's the core about the organization. It is something that I feel brings a voice, and I testify, which is great now via Zoom, very much easier than last year, bringing some of our housing stories to the committee levels that we're having discussions about what that looks like and why it matters. But we do like to have our private sector members really give the business case about why it matters that we address these issues. So yes, we've been able to testify, bring those connections via our lobbyist. That really is our core staff, is a lobbyist that functions on behalf of us as an organization.
So this group broke off. First of all, thank you. So this group broke off from, or not broke off, but kind of branched off from.
Yeah, I think it was a task force initially, or a committee. I think in 2014, if I remember correctly. So it is relatively new, and Fergus Falls has been involved in it from kind of its inception, and then that kind of transferred when I transitioned to the county. I remained a member. So the EIC, I believe, was a member. I'm not. Do you remember who was a member? Or was it? Not sure if it was the port or the EIC that was a member prior.
Probably the EIC. I wonder if Harold was a member back at that time.
I think so.
And was kind of the idea behind it to build a coalition of government and private sector?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. And to bring, it's not just government asking for these things. It's what is the function of government to, in some cases, be involved in solutions to, again, issues that are unique in Greater Minnesota to help the private sector thrive in Greater Minnesota. So whether it's providing quality, affordable childcare, or quality, affordable housing, or anything else in between. So those are kind of the position that we take, but try to bring it to a business case on why these things matter, and again, providing that private sector perspective about why they're not able to attract people when there's literally a 1.8% rental vacancy in the county, which is not healthy for anyone.
Well, that's really good. I mean, we need every voice we can speaking for us in St. Paul. So, does anybody else have any questions on it?
Is it everybody, is it counties minus the 7 county metro that are eligible?
I think it's 11
Represented?
county.
I'm sorry?
They go to the
11 county metros?
county,
Okay.
I think is what they categorize.
So it's, but the inevitable is, what does it cost?
Yeah.
76.
Steve, did you have a question?
No, it's kind of like a rural chamber then, isn't it? And-
Yeah, chambers are members too. We're actually looking at some strategic messaging with the Minnesota Chamber. I happen to know their current board chair, and so we're working on who is from the Metro. He's from an engineering firm, but someone that's planning and engineering, but that we're looking at some joint things. So it does bring a chamber perspective as well, but so there are a number of chamber members. I neglected to mention them.
Right, but I mean, it acts like a chamber too, when you think about it.
Yeah, yep,
Almost
with
identical.
a pure focus of
Rural,
legislative change.
yeah.
Yep.
And that's one of the best things the chamber brings, really, is the advocacy.
Yep, and the voice, the
Yeah.
combined voice.
Interesting. That's cool.
Anybody have, Anthony asked about the cost.
Yeah.
I presume we'll get to that. Did you
I
have any
mean,
other thoughts?
For me, I don't know how many organizations as a city we want to belong to. I mean, we belong to the League of Minnesota Cities, we belong to Coalition. You know, they're all advocating for the same things, you know, so, you know, this is taxpayer money that we're supporting these groups with. So, I mean, if we're going to do another group and another group, you know, and plus we also have our own kind of, obviously, lobbyist as well. I think if we're going to do these, we should have a budget as a city of what we're going to spend on lobbying in general, because you know, some of them are expensive.
So this is maybe a question that should go to the city council.
I mean, obviously, technically, they're asking the Port Authority, but, I mean, I think it's all taxpayer money. So, I mean, the League of Minnesota brings obviously a lot of other benefits in terms of insurance and things like that. But, you know, obviously, you know, what this was born from, you have to ask, well, are we wasting our money then on the coalition? If this is a spin-off group from that, why did that happen? I mean, obviously it started as, you know, as a subcommittee, and then it's morphed into being its own organization. Then what is Coalition of Minnesota Cities doing then? Because they're advocating for the same things. I mean, when Elizabeth comes, you know, she says they're looking at infrastructure, they're looking at housing, they're looking at childcare. You know, I mean, everybody's lobbying for the same things. So how many lobbyists do we need? It's all money.
Yeah, I
That's-
think,
yeah.
I think, you know, we don't have to get too far into the inception of the partnership, but, I mean, it's a valid point, you know, it's money that we, you know, are asked to be responsible stewards of.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be is what, you know, what, if, so are you're asking if the Port Authority wants to become a
I'm here just
member?
providing information.
I know.
Okay.
Yeah.
Oh.
Okay, sorry, Amy, I
Yeah,
didn't.
no, but just, Claire had
Yeah.
identified it and then asked me to come
Okay.
just because of
Yeah.
my
Okay.
deeper knowledge of the organization.
Okay,
Yep, so just here is informational.
does anyone have any other questions for Amy?
Well, you know, I'm kind of in agreement with Anthony here, but the only thing I'd like to know on the side is, what are they offering that the other ones don't?
Yeah.
I mean, if they're offering the similar things, then yes, we're in the same category here. But if they're offering something different, you know, I'm willing to listen, doesn't mean I'm willing to go with it, but the point is I'd like to hear what they have to say and what they're offering and what strategies they have that maybe the other ones don't have.
Yeah, yeah,
And it might be a better bet.
sure, yeah.
I mean, it might be a better use of our money.
I guess from my perspective, the thing that appealed to me was the cross-sector working together. I think having businesses tell a business story, but also including the government in that conversation and essentially just like bringing those two together and then presenting that. That's what appealed to me. Because I feel like we try to do a lot of that here. We have an outside economic development group that's working with the city. And so we're almost like a microcosm of what is being brought to the legislature, I guess, through this group. So it's just, I thought it was an interesting fit for us.
Sure.
So, but I am open to all discussion.
And I can add just from a distinction, I think what Clara just said, that the private sector participation is a distinction. If I remember correctly, the Coalition of Greater Minnesota Cities, CGMC, is only cities that can be members.
Sure.
And so,
Yeah.
and it advocates purely on behalf of the cities themselves. Is that a fair statement? Versus this organization is advocating on behalf of the employers of Greater Minnesota and its residents. And, it's not to, they won't be talking about local government aid at the Greater Minnesota Partnership work. That doesn't get discussed. It's about what programs can help get housing built in our communities that wouldn't otherwise happen if it were not for a change at the state legislature or a program. I mean, some of the areas that we, and as an organization, works with legislators to introduce very specific legislation, drafting that legislation, doing the legislative research to support that case and understanding where it really is going to make a difference in that particular topic area. So it's not just looking out for government, it's looking out for the economies of Greater Minnesota.
I would think that I think it's only like $1,500 for a city our size. And, I mean, if you're able to get contacts and understand stuff better and help get a deal done in the next 10 years even, the money will come back easily.
Sure.
So that's a slam dunk. Should be a budget, though. I agree with you guys. I mean, and that's up to, if there's, at the city level, then I don't know how this works again, because the port's a subset of it. If you have to figure out at the council level what we're gonna spend and then what you're gonna join, I guess that's outside our conversation here, but otherwise, I think it's a great investment.
And do does the city, the port, want that to be a Port Authority Director membership or a Community Development Manager? Either way, like you said, it's the same tax dollars, so it's just, where do we want that to fall? We have a budget in both of those departments, so I can't speak off the top of my head what's in that dues and memberships, but we would look at that.
Or it might be spent, but
Is the county a member?
Yes. I would not be on the board if I was.
It's just that they're not listed as a member.
Is it the
Community Development Agency, possibly?
Oh, okay.
I'm not sure.
Community what, sorry?
Development agency.
So
No.
I think,
I'll make sure I get that fixed.
But-
I'll follow up right now.
That isn't on there
And it is,
either.
to clarify, it is an organizational membership, so, at the legislative day or things like that, it's not about, if there's 3 people who are members,
yeah,
then
yeah,
it's the organization that
yeah,
would be the member.
yeah.
Yep, and anyone can get their information or contribute or, yeah.
Yeah, well, thank you. I appreciate you letting us know about it. And then I'd say Andrew and Bill and Clara, maybe if you guys want to work out the details behind the scenes and let us know if you need anything from us or what that might be.
I mean, just looking at the membership, we're Central Initiative is a member, Bolton and Menkar, Flaherty and Hood, Ottertail Power and Ottertail Corporation. That's 5 organizations that we work with, a lot. I'm just conscious of like how many dollars we spend on lobbying, and is one more voice going to make a difference, or can we drop some? I wanted to drop Coalition of Minnesota Greater Cities last year because that's like $32,000, and I question what value we get for that.
I think from a pure lobbying perspective, we wouldn't do this, I wouldn't be for it at all.
Yeah.
I think it's more of the connections, it's almost like continuing ed for
Yeah.
staff.
Yeah,
If they're able to understand better what's going on in the state,
yeah,
that's worth that. But if not, if we don't get that, then I would not be for it, because I agree with what you're saying.
yeah,
But to be clear, there isn't a motion and there's no action
Yep.
that's being asked.
No.
We're just simply
Yep.
getting some
Discussing.
information
Yeah.
today.
yeah.
So I guess I really appreciate that we know about it, and I think that Amy kind of explained it, but wasn't able to go into all the benefits, which I would surmise that some of the benefits are the connections and are, well, if you're a member, then, maybe
participate.
Ottertail Power is the one testifying or is giving their story or is able to advocate for your particular region. So I don't always think yes, it's good to have multiple people from our community, but I do think we can look at something that we're going to invest in the greater
Yeah.
goals for all of greater Minnesota too.
Yeah, and that's.
Which I think, to Steve's point, sounds like a small investment
Yeah. Well,
compared to potential benefits.
if it helps give Clara more tools in her belt and more networking, more connections, I mean, that's gonna pay dividends, again and again, so.
Yeah, if Claire's got that, if you get that through other methods, then we won't need to do this.
Sure.
But if you don't, it'd probably be a good way to.
Yeah. Yep, I think, nothing wrong with, taking advantage of every opportunity you can to stay connected and up to date and,
If it turns
So
out
we
to be
should-
just pure lobbying, like you say, then I agree. I don't think we would want to do it.
So I will make a pros and cons list. We will make a budget. I will bring it back.
yeah,
Okay?
sounds good. All right.
Thank you, Amy.
Yeah, thanks again, Amy.
Absolutely.
Review the dairy RFP draft. How are we doing for time?
Just a reminder, we have to be done by 5:20 tonight because there was an open forum submitted for the city council.
Okay.
So maybe
Will that work, Clara?
Yep, I want you guys to see the RFPs.
Okay, yeah, we don't need to necessarily worry too much about the project updates, so if we need to,
And we'll see how we're doing for time. yeah.
okay. Let's do it.
All right, thank you and good evening. So distributed over by email on Friday was a draft of the RFP. And I think we just wanted to stress that this is very much a discussion draft and just looking for some feedback in particularly about the milestones and timing and some of those redevelopment guidelines and proposal requirements for developers that were interested in the dairy site, as well as if there's any ideas that the port has about the selection committee. So the RFP draft is just organized by sections. So we just have an intro section that covers the roles and responsibilities of the developer versus the port authority. Our second section just gives a brief overview of the city of Fergus Falls and the site. I'm thinking that some developers that may be interested may not be from the city of Fergus Falls, so just giving some of that overall site context. The third section needs to be reviewed by our engineering department a little bit more, but is just a summary of the remediation that's occurred to date on the site. Section 4, the redevelopment guidelines. If you remember, the Port Authority had a survey, and we had some discussion about what the port might like to see on that site when it's redeveloped. So that's where some of that material came from. And Section 5 is just what the developer needs to submit in a proposal. So for this section, if there's things that you, as a reviewer, would perhaps like to see from a developer, that would be something that we could add to this list as well. And our evaluation criteria, the city just has a template for reviewing request for proposals. And these are the 4 criteria and points that are typically assigned. So that's just my very brief overview, and I'm happy to take any questions or open up for any discussion that folks have. And of course, as we go along in the next couple of weeks, if you think of something or go back and visit your notes or the draft, please feel free to send an email or call or carry your pigeon, I suppose. Yeah.
Did everybody get a chance to see it on Friday?
I will admit that I have not had time to go through it,
Okay.
so.
We'll see what you mean RFP. Yeah. Okay. Oh, I guess my question is this typical in how this would be described for this type of project? I don't know that. Just the
I would
generality of
say
it.
it's brief. Certainly, we reviewed other RFPs. I mean, they ranged from 30 to 100 pages. So this is trying to be straightforward and to the point.
So my question would be then, do we have a good review criteria coming back because it's so general, so we can actually discern between what we get?
I think we could develop one. Right now, what Karin was saying is we have just sort of like a template review that we would do that really only currently is identifying like 4 different pieces of what would be coming back. So we could make that a little bit more robust.
We know how to do that? I don't know how to do that, so I'm just asking. We could get pretty definitive if you have 10 proposals and they're quite different underneath this generality, would feel comfortable
So
making them?
there's specific questions that are under these criteria, these 4 buckets. Is that maybe more helpful?
That is helpful.
Yep.
What page, what 4 buckets are you looking at? On what page?
So it's those,
Final page.
that last page, section 6.
Okay.
It's essentially an Excel workbook. We can distribute it out just so that you're sort of aware of what it looks like. But there's, I think, multiple questions. I can't remember the exact number under each of those 4. And so that way it also provides a standard review process for proposals that might be very different.
Yeah, so it'd be just the project understanding. How definitive is that?
Yep, we can send out those questions, and if there's something more specific or revisions that we'd like to make for this particular project, it can certainly be tailored.
Yeah.
I wouldn't know better than you. I'm just asking the questions. So if you count the questions underneath that one defined really well, then I mean, that-
Yeah, so let's all look at that and make sure that we're comfortable with it. And I understand if you maybe don't feel like you're, but I think everybody's eyes should be on it.
Okay.
And then another discussion we should maybe have is when we do get to the point of reviewing, who is doing the reviewing?
You reference a selection committee in here.
Indeed.
I assume that would be appointed by the Port Authority.
How does that normally?
One of my questions was, is the selection committee simply the Port Authority, or is it more tailored than that?
If you do it that way, you would have limitations in terms of how you could interact or interview potential proposals, because then
That's
it
a
would be
good
a
point.
public meeting. So generally, in the past, we've had 1 or 2 members of, I mean, we've never done this with the port, but for city RPs, we've done, maybe a member of the planning commission, a member of the port, 2 members of the council, and then staff, the appropriate staff or whatever. But it could be, you guys can get creative with what you want that to look like.
That'd be good, and some area developer types that understand this really well, and how you
Yeah.
make sure they're not involved in it. You know what I mean, saying? Just the expertise.
Right, maybe you want to grab an engineer to tell you that that's viable,
Yeah.
what they're proposing. Right.
Yeah, great idea.
We can think more on that. I would just, my only hesitation would be to have the entire group, because then everything will be conducted publicly, and that, if you want to do it that way, fine, but a developer's not going to like that.
That
Yeah.
doesn't sound good.
Yep. They don't usually like when you stream those meetings to YouTube, so.
No.
Having an engineer.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So I suppose then, how do we intend to publicize and market this RFP so we can cast as wide a net as possible?
Yeah, Karin and I talked about that. Do you want to discuss at all?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of, local trade associations or state trade associations. There's also some national lists. If anyone has suggestions for specific ones, I think we'd be open to those.
And then when do we propose to actually, because obviously there's questions on RFP due January 24. So is that questions from them, or is that questions internally?
So typically on a large redevelopment project like this, you're going to have the developers have questions of the city about specific items or processes. So those would be questions back to the city. So I think internally we were thinking about releasing this at the beginning of 2022 in January. So they would have about 3 weeks to see the proposal, the RFP, look it over, come up with those questions.
So I think we internally, like this group who's looking at the RFP to put it together, we want to be done by the end of December.
Yep.
Yeah.
The key thing is they have 2 months to get the proposal in from the time they receive it. Questions in the middle, that seems reasonable.
And we can be flexible on it's our RFP, so if we want to extend it, we can extend it, whatever.
Yeah, I'd say that the framework looks good, and it sounds like we've got some good dialogue going around feedback and that type of thing. So Anybody have any other concerns, issue? Bridget?
I just have a question about the roads and the right-of-way piece. So
Sure.
it says there are no existing roads on the site. There are no existing dedicated public right-of-way on the site. Correct. But there's the one access to it.
There's access, but the parcel itself within it has no internal circulation. So someone would have to, in the subdivision process or otherwise, have private roads within it, is essentially what we were trying to communicate with that.
Right.
And the flexibility of the fact that there aren't
Correct.
road right-of-ways now, so as you develop your project, you can put them in the most advantageous place, assuming the city is on board with that identified location.
We have to put forth contract terms in here. I mean, that's usually typical in RFP, but I have no idea from the city perspective if we do that. In the end, we expect these general contractual terms, and if you're outside of those, not gonna qualify type of thing, or we don't do it.
Oh, go ahead, Andrew.
No, you go ahead.
Oh, I think the extent of that would be an eventual developer's agreement for the redevelopment of the project site.
Right, that'd be the end, but I mean, we don't have to purport anything here. Just
No, because it would be dependent upon what the project is.
Okay.
And quite frankly, you as a group can determine what the acceptable terms would or wouldn't be.
And we won't know that. I mean, I think
Until you
there's
see
some
it.
basic legal, that within the framework of this, we'd expect them to take a certain amount of the risk, and we'd put it right in this RFP to eliminate some if there's any. I mean, maybe that's not typical of this, so that's fine. I'm just asking the question. Just have to have legal review. We would anyway, I guess. So.
Yep.
Thank you.
All right. Anyone have anything else to add on that issue?
I have one more question, but I can't find the spot, but it says like there's no timeline and no, it says like the city has no, timeline for this getting done, or, anyway, I just.
Oh,
I'm
I think you may be referencing the potential second access on St. Andrew Street.
Well, yeah.
Right, the second railroad crossing.
Page
Um,
2, under potential future
Sorry, I
access.
should've-
Page 3,
Three,
page
yeah.
3, under current infrastructures and utilities, potential future access. So that is, I think we've gone back and forth about including this in the eventual published draft. So this is very much a long-term, I wouldn't even say goal, just possibility, that there could be a second railroad crossing, which would, permit a second road access to the site. Just sort of maybe alerting a developer to that possibility if they wish to subdivide their land and put some right-of-way in a way that could allow that future connection, but that would be totally up to them.
Got it.
All right. Anything else, Clara, on the RFP or?
No, just, I guess, I mean, if there are questions about, like, the legality of what needs to be in there, like, this is the time to be asking those things, so that's good. And then we can, figure it out from there. I think our goal will be to have another draft for the next meeting and just keep rocking through it until we can.
Because shouldn't we almost finalize it at the next Port Authority meeting if it's to be finalized and published?
Oh my gosh, yeah, because it's November.
Because
Yep.
we're November now, and
Yeah.
December is kind of like upon us, and we have holidays in there. So pretty much, it needs to be its final form
Yeah.
next meeting.
If you want January 1st, but if
Yep.
you wanted to push it 1 month, then you have.
I would say we're going to hit the road, and because we have to start paying back on our loans, so we need to be marketing it.
Yeah, so I guess, we'll take, the notes from
Yeah.
today and add that to the draft, and then if you guys think of anything else, if you want to just send it, yeah, Caroline.
I have it's kind of a really random question, but what if they wanted that city park too?
I don't think we
No.
can relinquish that at all.
No, once we close on that with the covenants that will be in place because of the LCCMR monies, that's a perpetual easement
Okay.
that has to be set aside for public recreation. So it has to be publicly owned and has to be open to the public.
And the way that we laid out.
Barefoot Park?
Oh, no, I'm
Barefoot.
sorry. I'm talking about the riverfront acreage.
My question was more Barefoot Park. Is that, like, what if they wanted that with where that St. Andrews Street is?
City council would have to make a decision.
And we'd have to see if we have any restrictions on
That's
that.
what I
I
was
don't
wondering.
remember how
We
we,
can research,
how we received that part.
I think Jim might have an issue with that, wasn't he involved with creating Barefoot Park?
Jim.
Fish.
Been involved with everything for
Yes,
the past
he did
30
say-
years.
He did say that. I don't remember the details.
It's just a random question if they,
good to-
for
we can
some
res-
reason, wanted.
I think there is
that
some
space.
form of covenants
We'll
on
check
it
the
or
parcel
something,
file
because we
downstairs.
tried to include that in one of our grant applications. And I'm not saying it's on another thing we were looking at.
Okay.
Trying to include that. in
We
some
tried to
form of
Trail
include
gonna
it
go
into
through that?
leverage for
Well, we're
money.
gonna try to put a portion of that into the perpetual easement.
So-
So we can develop more of the dairy.
Karen, do you have what you need from us at this point?
Yep, I would just stress if you have further comments or if you wanted a chance to still look it over, to do that. But as stated, it is November, so anything in the next few weeks so that we could bring that final draft in December, I think is a really great goal.
You can just ask Rolf if we should have a base standard terms and conditions in here. If you think so, then,
Sure, yep.
thank you.
And then, I know you guys have got plenty going on, but yeah, as soon as you get something that is final, if you want to send it to us for the next meeting, and we can have plenty of time to review it.
Yep.
Cool. All right, Claire, do you think you can give us thank you, Karen. Do you think you can give us a quick update on our updates?
Sure. So we have. So just an overall update on all of your purview, I guess. You have several leases with farmers currently on land that the Port Authority owns, and also some leases for things like the school. Not at our last meeting, but I think the meeting before that, you had indicated that you wanted to keep those leases the same, and focus on maybe some other development things that are going on, like your dairy RFP. So that is the direction that we got, and that's the direction that we are going. If you would like to reconsider that and open up for bids, I think we're probably not at a point where we could do that. So hopefully you want to just stay the course on that. So you'll have your leases that are moving forward. The parcel of land that could potentially house the extension of International Drive no longer has an investor interested in it. That said, we have put about 60 grand worth of engineering into it to plan a road. So I'm still looking for grant opportunities, and we've got a federal application that will be going in probably by the end of this month. So hopefully somebody else pops up and is interested in that land. As I mentioned earlier, you have sold all of your Progress Drive properties. Those closings are, if they haven't already taken place, are currently taking place. And then as far as the dairy, you saw an updated RFP. We will continue to work on that. The closing is still not complete. The appraiser's office and the DNR appraisal review office are currently at odds about timeline. They are aware of when our closing date is, and I am still hopeful that they will complete the process. But
And which project was that on? I'm sorry.
the dairy
Oh.
closing?
Okay, okay.
LCCMR parcel?
Yep, LCCMR
Okay.
parcel.
Oh, sorry. Okay, yep.
I think, am I missing anything?
Anybody have any questions on anything we have going on? All right, thank you very much, Claire, appreciate it. Okay, then I'll flip my notepad back over, and I think that's, unless anybody else has anything?
I have one
Claire
more.
has
I
something.
forgot to put this on there, but if you guys could start thinking about, you'll have to have an election for your chair. So we'll coming up in January. It's already been almost a whole year, so just start percolating that, and I can send more information out about that via email, but just have that on your radar.
Okay, thank you. All right, well, with that, we are adjourned.